Hey, Rachel Graham with MarAlliance here, and welcome to the last of the WCN Spring Expo presentations. And we're going to stick with this theme of the sea, taking us all back to where we originated from. So what I want to do is I want to tell you the story of the largest fish that you may actually never see. And this story started 20 years ago when I was working with traditional fishers to unravel some of the mysteries of the whale shark, the world's largest fish in the Western Caribbean. And when I was doing so, because we spent so much time on boats, I was actually asking them about the status of other sharks and rays. Rays being the flat sharks, or the cousins of sharks. And what they told me was that things are bad. And this was, 20 years ago. Things are bad. We're just not seeing the same number of sharks and rays as we used to. And in fact, that's been supported by some of the more recent publications coming out showing a massive 71% decline in sharks and rays, especially those of open ocean, since 1970s. And this is also mirrored by the decline that local fishers had perceived in one of the most iconic of the ray species in the world, the sawfish. And the sawfish can be over 6 meters long. It looks like a prehistoric weaponized brown carpet with an underbite and a smile. And yet this incredibly shy creature, of which there are only 5 species in the world, is now, for the most part, 3 of those 5 species are critically endangered to extinction, as determined by the IUCN and the Shark Specialist Group worldwide. And why is that? Because they are bottom dwelling, they are readily entangled in nets, and they have been just such an easy prey for fishers around the coastlines. And 50% of a lot of our species around the world for sharks and rays, over 600 species, are actually found very close to coastlines. And so there's a big overlap with human populations. So I realized my interest is peaked, but I had, a plate full of whale shark work to do and a newborn baby. So it took me a few years to actually get on to the subject of sawfish, by which time fishers were saying, it's been even longer since we've actually seen one. And that's really where I started the work with the sawfish, is with trying to glean local ecological knowledge through surveys with fishers. And looking through the historical records, going to museum collections, pulling all of this together, and really noting that through what the fishers were telling us, for the most part, most of the fishers had not seen any in 2 or 3 decades, had not seen any of these species. And they'd seen the small-toothed sawfish more recently, like only in a couple of years to 10 years back, versus the large-toothed sawfish, which is more estuarine in the rivers, and they had not seen that species for 25 to 40 years. So it's really the older fishers that were seeing them. That was 170 surveys conducted in Belize, Guatemala, and the northern part of Honduras, facing the Caribbean Sea. And nets again were really identified as the main reason for their demise, and this has been seen throughout work that's been done with sawfish by colleagues in other tropical countries. And it didn't help that, for example, their meat was readily sold, their fins sold to the Asian market, they're actually quite sought after, and of course the rostrum, so that snout with the teeth on it, that was cut off and usually used as an adornment. In Belize, it would tend to be given away, but increasingly you're finding a really huge illegal trade in the rostra, and they can be worth thousands of dollars. And so that's not benefiting the persistence of sawfish either. But what was very clear from the fishers is that they had not seen these animals in a long time, and I started really getting worried, because this means that we could be seeing one of the largest fish in the world going extinct, in our lifetimes. And so we set about doing a lot of work just to look at the status of coastal sharks and rays. We set over 75,000 hooks over the course of a decade. We put underwater cameras, all kinds of things, and developed this network of fishers throughout the country, and in fact the Mesoamerican reef, so Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, and nobody was coming up with any sightings at all. We even put posters up saying, seeking sawfish, but nothing. So it was really thrilling to me when many of us came together in 2012 from around the world, trying to find sawfish, trying to work with sawfish, and developed a strategy of how do we move forward with a fish that you barely ever see and that we really want to bring back from the brink of extinction. And what did my colleagues find, and what did I find from kind of looking in the region, that perhaps there might be some of these lifeboat sites, right, in Central America, so remote, so difficult to access, that they might still have remnant populations. And a couple of those sites were in very remote areas in Honduras and also in Panama. And lo and behold, serendipitously, I had the good fortune of taking on a master's student, Megan Chevis at the time. I brought her over from turtles to sharks. She loved turtles, but now she loves sharks even more. And she wanted to, after her master's, go back to Panama to be with her family. And she was really keen to kickstart some work with sharks and rays and really expand any of the work, which was fairly limited at the time, to see what the status was of sharks and rays in Panama, and notably the status of sawfish. And this is where I hand the baton over to Megan Chevis.
So when we first started developing our program here in Panama, one of our goals was to find out more about the status of sawfish in the country. We had a lot of questions about the historical populations of sawfish, the reasons behind their declines for the last several decades, and of course we wanted to know if they could even still be found in Panama, and if so, where. So to help us answer these questions, we first took a deep dive into historical records of sawfish captures and sightings over the last 100 years. And you can see here one of the photos that we found. This is from 1934, and it's actually of a large tooth sawfish that was found trapped in one of the dry docks of the Panama Canal on the Pacific side. Just like in Belize, we've also been collecting traditional ecological knowledge of fishers. So over the last few years, my team members and I have been traveling all around the country, visited over 70 communities to conduct interviews with fishers and find out more about their experiences and their perceptions of sawfish, as well, of course, we wanted to know about their most recent encounters with sawfish. And what we found, unfortunately, for sites on the Caribbean side, it looks like sawfish are most likely locally extinct, given that the most recent encounters occurred over 30 to 40 years ago. And this includes sites like the Cuna Yala Comarca, where sawfish actually have a significant role in the culture of the Cuna people and are considered guardians of the Cuna region. The good news, though, is that we've been able to identify a couple of sites on the Pacific side of the country that were not only historically important for sawfish, but more importantly, where they can still be found even today. And one of those sites is the Darian province in eastern Panama. The large rivers and estuarine waters of the Darian are critical nursery habitats for large-tooth sawfish, and may be one of the last places in the region where the species can still be found. So even though we've had this incredible discovery, we've been able to confirm the continued existence of sawfish in Panama. We also know that their status is critical and there are multiple threats for their survival. And one of those, as Rachel mentioned, really the primary threat for sawfish is incidental capture in fisheries, and especially in nets. And this is definitely an ongoing threat for sawfish that remain in the Darian. In most cases, when sawfish are captured by fishers, their meat is consumed or sold locally. But another threat that we're seeing in this region is that the teeth of sawfish saws are highly prized for use in creating spurs that are used in rooster fighting, which unfortunately is a fairly common practice in countries in Central and South America. So when fishers capture sawfish, in some cases they already have a buyer in mind they can call up, and who will give them several hundreds of dollars for the smaller saws, and for the larger saws that are over a meter in length, for example, they can get several thousands of dollars. But an additional aspect of this, and really another barrier that prevents sawfish from being released alive, is that in most cases, when fishers capture a live sawfish, their immediate reaction is to kill the animal. And this is simply because they're afraid of it and they don't know how to safely handle the animal without risking injury to themselves or damage to their fishing gear or their boats, which can be very costly to replace or repair. And this is honestly very understandable considering these animals can reach very large sizes, up to 7 meters, over 20 feet in length. They have a literal saw coming out of the front of their head, and they're usually not too happy when they're caught up and tangled up in fishing gear. So what do we do? How do we work to remove these barriers so that sawfish can be released alive and at least have a chance at recovery? Well, just like in the other projects that we have with MarAlliance, our approach is really to work directly with fishers and to sit down, have conversations with them, and really get a better understanding of their fisheries, their livelihoods, and the needs of their communities to try to find a middle ground where we can work towards conserving and protecting sawfish, but also not harming and possibly even helping and improving their way of life and their fisheries. And this is what we've been doing recently in the Darian region with fishers who are still catching sawfish. I want to give a huge shout out to our community officer in the Darian, Jairo Konambio Tokama. Jairo is a brilliant naturalist. He loves wildlife. He loves the Darian. He's very proud of the biodiversity in the Darian. And Jairo recently has been working to expand our work in the Darian and really sit down and have these conversations with fishers about the plight of sawfish, about possibilities for their conservation and for the release, and really helping us to expand our network in the area. And this work has already started to pay off. So at the end of last year, we got the amazing Christmas present of photos sent to us by some of our fisher partners in the Darian of sawfish they had caught in their nets, but that they had decided to release alive. And again, just a few weeks ago, we received more photos from another fisher who had caught a sawfish and released it alive, following conversations with Jairo about the project and about the plight of sawfish. So it's stories like these that really give us a lot of hope for the future of sawfish and for marine wildlife in the region. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done, and our focus now is on building up those relationships and trust that we have with fishers in the area, expanding our fisher network to involve more communities and more fishers, and also conducting training activities, capacity building activities, so that fishers are not only more able to and willing to release sawfish alive, but they can actually participate in and contribute to sawfish monitoring and research, and really be the guardians of some of the last sawfish in the region and in the world. So again, we're really excited about what's to come. We're really hopeful for the future, and we're excited to be able to share more stories like these with you in the future.
So I'm absolutely thrilled at that amazing news that sawfish have been caught live here in Panama, and really kudos to our fisher network for coming together, sharing the information with us, and also being willing to actually release the sawfish. It's been a very hard year for them during the pandemic, and many of them live on a knife edge economically. So for them to release a species that could be worth a lot to them, especially when the sale of the rostra and the teeth, means so very, very much. And this is one of the key challenges as we move forward and try to bring these species back from the brink, is that their trade value is very, very high, and there's such demand for the products. But we do have some other very good news, and that is that they're not actually only found in Panama, because we're using a cutting edge means of trying to detect them in areas where they might not be readily seen because the waters are turbid or just because the numbers are so small. And that is environmental DNA, which we've conducted in Panama, which indeed confirmed their presence not only in the site where they're being actually captured and released, but in some other sites as well. But also in Honduras, in some of the remote parts of Honduras. And then, surprisingly enough, when we thought that none would ever be seen again, in Belize. And the best part of it in Belize is that the fishers, when surveyed all those years ago, had said, we would love to see them come back. And they could come back if gill nets were banned. Well, guess what? On November 2020, the government of Belize decided to ban the use of gill nets throughout the country. And this was with absolutely massive support from the majority of all fishers, private sector, NGOs, recreational fishers, you name it, huge support. And there was a transition fund for the legal gill netters to be able to move them into alternatives, economic alternatives. So the conditions have been set. We've removed the major barrier. We have still a lot of critical habitat that is necessary for sawfish to thrive and live out their life cycle, and there's even food for them. So it is my hope, it is my vision that within my lifetime, or what's left of my lifetime, those my children, your lifetime, we will see sawfish come back from the brink of extinction, not just in Panama, in Honduras, but very much in Belize, very dear to my heart. It's a long-term endeavor. This doesn't happen overnight. The same with all of these species that you've heard about today. You don't change behaviors, you don't change attitudes, you don't shift alternatives economically overnight. We're in it for the long run. This is not a sprint. This is a conservation marathon. So thank you for joining us. Join us in our vision of bringing back these species from the brink. And thank you for supporting all of us in our endeavor to keep the hope, keep the torch lit for all of these incredible species, and come and join us in the field. Thank you.